And we should be live very soon, literally in a few more seconds. I'm just gonna see if I can see us go live. Okay, it'll probably take a few more seconds. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Richie, for joining us. We are blessed to have you here, making sure at my end I can, let me see. Yep, I can see everything is fine at my end. So, wow, how's your day been, first of all, Richie?
Oh, this is fascinating. This is my last official interview and activity before I go on holidays here. So
Oh,
let's.
okay. Saving the best till last. I'm happy to hear that. And I'm in London, by the way. It's all, I think it's just gone by 8 p.m. Where are you based at the moment?
I'm in New Jersey in the U.S. and it is 3 p.m. EST here.
Okay, EST, perfect. So with that being said, I'm gonna formally introduce you to our fellow kings and queens out there. Guys, thank you very much for joining us. And again, with our incredible crypto interview series, Men and Women of Color Leading the Blockchain Revolution. And we are very blessed to have Richie with us, and we would love to know your journey, what you've been doing in the space, and you know, just really to get to know you and your mission and what inspires you, what motivates you, and all, you know, any particular things we can learn from you as well. So let's get into it. Just to start off with, what's your personal background, Richie? Where are you from? What city do you rep? You know, what's your life, your background? What has it been like? Share us how you got started, who you are, first of all.
Yeah. So I'm a Guyanese, which is a British colony.
Okay.
So I was born in South America and migrated to the U.S. Like most immigrants. I got here at the age of 16, and you know, surprised by many things, including how many limousines there were in the world. Right? It was like, you know, when you come from a third world country and you only look at movies, you know, I thought only Eddie Murphy had a limousine, right? And then you get and you're like, whoa, 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 limousines are all over the place. So, you know, I'm an immigrant. I live in the U.S. I'm a techie. I'm a business executive. I'm a bit of an activist. And I've been studying human data ethics for about 20 years now. And across that, various technologies, obviously the cloud wave, the mobile wave, the social wave, and got into blockchain just like I got into everything else with experimentation, and now trying to redirect all of my efforts to something that I truly believe in, which is that human data should be human property.
Yes, the 31st human right is what I read in your written interview. That is absolutely, I was saying to myself, oh my goodness, why didn't we think of this earlier? Because, you know, our data, goodness knows who's handling it, who controls it, who's selling what. And we've seen with the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, how, you know, impactful it could be. So, and we don't know most of the things that's going on out there with our information. So I'm so happy that you're on to really discuss this and give us a deep down, you know, a deep scope that perhaps we may never have thought of and how important this is to us and how it affects us. So tell me a bit more, though, about your journey in particular, when you were a young youth, you know, when you were quite young. Like, what inspired you? You said you were nerdy and a bit geeky, and you love technology and all the digital revolutions we've seen. Speak on that. What really piqued your interest when you were younger, and you know, what inspired you to get in the space where you're in now?
Yeah. So I think, you know, technology is something that we all sort of played with in the beginning. and then it became a way to make a living, right? For me, when I grew up, when I was 16, 17, 18, much like, generations prior, played with basketballs or played with sports or played with, BMX bicycles, right? I played with technology. It was a thing of play. And, I think we were one of the first generations in the world where as a teenager, the thing of play became the thing that you can actually make a living from. So I got into technology via play, and play is one of the most unique ways to learn things, right? It's very,
definitely.
You're super passionate about it, right? So when I started writing software, I wasn't writing software to make money. I was writing software because I wanted to write better software than everybody else, right? That was writing software in the space, whether it was my own projects or, the old progies inside of AOL and Prodigy and that type of stuff. So it was something that I was very passionate about. I think that the transition to commercializing it for me came around the time when, I wanted to build something of my own that people could use. And I remember using AOL chat, and of course it's not as good as the chats that we have today, right? So there was room for improvement. And I remember thinking to myself, I was probably about 17, 18. I remember thinking to myself, all right, that's it. I'm gonna build a chat application, and this is how I'm gonna take over the world, right? And I'm gonna be better than AOL chat. And I had the power of the internet in front of me, right? I bought space from CompuServe. Back then, you didn't have to buy a TCP IP address. You would just pick one that no one's using, and it's yours, right? And I wrote a chat application. It was a terrible failure, right? Myself, my brother, and a couple of friends used it. And then I went on to Wall Street, and technology became a way to make money. But for the next 10 years, as I saw Amazon and I saw YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and things like that nature, I kept thinking to myself, man, I had the whole power of the internet in front of me, right? Everything. And all I thought to do, now, yes, I was a teenager, so I probably shouldn't be so hard on myself, but all I thought to do was to write a better version of something that I already saw. So that's why I wanted to write a better chat. I never took the time to recognize that it could be used for other things. Right? So when I got to things like cloud or mobility or social or even blockchain, for example, as soon as I got to it around 7-8 years ago, I saw Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency, and I'm like, okay, this is interesting, but I'm not going to make the same mistake I made with the internet, which is try to build a better Bitcoin. I'm going to study what's underneath there and try to figure out that. And I found the blockchain protocol, the distributed ledgers and asymmetric cryptography. And I said, okay, what I want to do then is find the YouTube of blockchain, right? Find the Uber of blockchain, find the Amazon of blockchain. So tech is one of those things where if you want to be in tech, you have to be a learn-it-all. A lot of us as we get older, we tend to be a know-it-all. You have to consistently want to be a learn-it-all. And I think that's been the single differentiator for me. And that motivation comes from a place of not having, right? Growing up in poverty and looking at the world and figuring out, like, I didn't have oil, right? I didn't have a trust fund. I didn't have real estate, right? I didn't have resources to go build a factory. But a technology business, you have a computer and a connection, you could probably start building a technology business.
And growing up, did you also what was your environment like? What was what did you feel in your experience, in your reality, your day-to-day living, and the people that you're surrounded with at the time? Obviously your friends, family, colleagues, and so on. But what was the mindset you had at that time, and what's your mindset like now? And what do you feel played important role to fill that gap? Because it's so important that with young people right now, they're getting so many confusing, conflicting messages, and that we have to find ways to communicate with them, to draw that, to tap into their passion and draw all that energy out, and divert it to something useful for them that will allow them to flourish and shine and grow. What is it in particular in your journey? Was it certain people, certain mentors that played a role in helping you see the world as a huge possibility? And one of the things I was really particularly inspired by was, I think one of your, you said there was a person that was, that called you one of the hidden Steve Jobs. Now that, I was like, whoa, I already saw that you like, I'm speaking to the next Steve Jobs. So tell me more about that. Who have been the people in your life that have influenced you, that have nurtured you like a seed buried in the ground, and help you, helping you to flower?
There's three moments that I will point to. First of all, I grew up in South Jamaica, Queens, New York, which is one of the most dangerous parts of New York City. In the projects, playing basketball on the streets. I grew up the same place 50 Cent grew up, in LL Cool J.
Okay, 50.
Right? So I know how to roll on the street, all right?
Hey.
And in that environment, it's very important, and it was very important there, and it continues to be very important now, to recognize that you're not going to get out of that environment unless you're inspired from the outside. And so everybody wanted to get out, but not everybody wanted to reach out. And I'll give you a specific example. When I went to college, and I went to, like City University, not the best school in the world, not the worst school in the world, right? So I went to City University, and I ran into a friend. His name was Anthony. And Anthony came from a different socioeconomic stratus that I came from, but we became friends. And remember, I lived in a one-bedroom apartment, a two-bedroom apartment shared by multiple families and that type of stuff. I remember going to Anthony's parents' house. I was probably about 19 years old. I went to Anthony's parents' house, and the furniture inside was beautiful. It looked like it came from a magazine. And there was a Mercedes-Benz E-Class parked in the driveway, right? Already known that's like an $80,000 car, right? And it was a brown family, right? It was, they came from Trinidad, right? I came from Ghana. And I remember asking, hey man, like, not for nothing, but like, what does your parents do? Because like, are you guys into drugs or something? How do your house looks this great, right?
Yeah.
And he said, no, mate, my mom's an executive at Victoria's Secret, right? And I said, just out of like, if you don't mind, like, and by the way, I was going to college, and the back of the book in the college program tells you that you'll make $40,000 a year when you graduate college, right? I said, just out of curiosity, like how much money does she make? And I think he said something like $150,000 or something like that, right, annually. And my brain exploded. I was like, wait, what? What? I thought the president made that. Like a person could make that, albeit someone that immigrated just like me and has my skin color. Like that was it. My $40,000 goal was done. I was like, I'm at least hitting 149, right? So I think those were the early years where we all knew we wanted to get out, but the way to get out was to be inspired from the outside, right? I think that was a key point. That was probably about 19 years old. It kind of reshaped my entire thinking around earnings, right? I think that was an important point. The second point, which I wrote about in the piece, is while I was at UBS. So I was at UBS, and just up and coming, guy in the middle ranks, right? You got a nice title, right? And you're young, and you're somewhat experienced but naive at the same time.
Yeah.
And I remember running into Dr. Anita Sands, who was this brilliant woman, very senior in the organization. And she had the ability to pull you forward into the future, like into yourself. There's a lot of people who paint the future. I'll be like, you know what, there's gonna be flying cars in the future, or there's gonna be, XYZ in the future. But very few people, other than your parents probably, look at you and go, I think you're gonna be the next Oprah Winfrey, right? Hey. And I was sitting in a meeting, and this is a professional relationship, and she was introducing me, and she said, here's Richie, he's one of the hidden Steve Jobs in the world. And she just moved on, right? And introduced everybody else. And this is someone who's well-educated, well-decorated. And I walked away from that meeting going, okay, there's one person in the world that thinks that I can do that. Okay, all I need is 7 billion, 400 million more. I got this, but there's one, right? It's like that first sale, right? And that stuck with me over the years. It kind of informed my courage, informed my bravery, it informed my honor. And these are the types of things that someone will say one thing and it will stay with you, and they don't remember whether they said it or not, right? So and the pattern is always that influence will come from not the people that you spend 99% of your time with, it's from the people that you spend 1% of your time with. And that influence will come from there. And if you have your ears open and you're listening for it, I think it serves you well.
And that's so, you know what, that, speaking of Steve Jobs, that reminded me of the part where in his, I think it was also in his commencement speech, but also in other documentaries made about him, that when he was going through a difficult time, I think he took a calligraphy class, excuse me, and that the beautiful fonts that we see on the MacBook, that some people have no idea the roots behind it, that during some of the I mean, he was a dropout as well, and I mean, Bill Gates was a dropout from Harvard, I think, as well. So Mark Zuckerberg as well. There seems to be this connection with dropouts and billionaires, but it's just that part really got me, that the fact that he took calligraphy classes, and looking, I mean, hindsight is 2020, but you would think, why on earth as a tech genius would you take calligraphy classes? But that, the way he brought beautiful, I mean, incredible technology, cutting edge technology, but the beauty and creativity, and simplified it and made it this incredible thing that we've never seen before. I mean, did you have moments like that as well, where you had certain things that you probably didn't understand at the time would be, I mean, the future impact it would have on how your work would be seen?
Yeah, well, I think.
I mean, speak more about your project as well, but was there any particular moments in your career?
I don't care to plug the project. That's fine. But this is a fascinating conversation because I don't get a chance to reflect as much as I'd like to. I think there is a beauty between art and science that has always existed. Even the greatest artists studied some scientific aspect, whether they ventured into mathematics or not. And I think that greatness tends to lie at the intersection of two unusual things when you make them collide, right? And in Jobs' case, obviously, it was art and technology, right? To think about that. For me, it was really around psychology and technology. So I'm all about dissertation and a PhD in leadership and psychology. And what it did for me was, most business people start with the business, all right? So you start with a business around how you're going to make money, and how are you going to fund the business, and how are you going to be profitable, and how are you going to pay your bills and eat and all that type of stuff. And when you study psychology, it allows you to recognize that there's a very complex instrument in the human head. Right? And you study leadership, there's a quite complex instrument in the human head that you have to be able to study to understand what they will want, right? And there are not a lot of products in the world that have made it to all 7 billion human beings, like man-made products, right? Things like, like breathing obviously made it to all 7 billion plus, but that's not man-made. But like even the pen is not to all 7 billion people. Like there are people that don't have pens, right? So when you want to think about a project that will reach the masses, so to speak, you have to start from the people, not from the business. And so I spent a lot of time studying leadership and psychology and EQ and emotions and sort of what people look for and that type of stuff. And it was a complete 360 for me, because it allowed me to do what I think is exactly sort of what happens to folks like Steve Jobs, which is to start with the customer first.
Yes.
Right? And you get there from different things. You can be inspired by art. You could be inspired by music. You could be inspired by psychology. You could be inspired by just sitting down and watching customers use your competitors. Okay. Like if you really want to understand what you should be building, go and sit with the customers who's using your competitor's product, because you'll see all the points of frustration, right? And you'll hear, especially if you're a bit of an ethnographer and you're asking them the right questions.
Yeah.
So I found that psychology is actually a beautiful counterpart to technology, because it allows you to stop worrying about the business first and start worrying about the people first.
Yes.
And it makes you a problem hunter, right? You start to become one of those people who are walking around going, what needs to be fixed? And if you identify what needs to be fixed, and if there's enough people that has that same problem, and you can build it in such a way where you can make a profit by solving it for them, then you've got a business, right? So that was a big sort of influence moment for me. That happened around my early 30s. And I never built another business or another product starting with the product. You hang out with the people, you figure out what they use. I go back to the old hood and hang out with my boys from back in the day, play a little dominoes, right? And they'll be, so what are you working on these days, man? I'm like, I'm just hustling. And then I'll ask them a couple of questions about something, right? And you'll get a perspective from there. I'd still hang out with, my friends from college. I still hang out with people that live in Astoria, because all of these are communities that will have to be able to adopt your product eventually. And you want to get that people's perspective first. I think a lot of technologists miss that. I think a lot of business people miss that. Even with cryptocurrencies, right? I've seen so many ICOs who I could have told you in 10 seconds that they'll fail, right? Because they never took the time to figure out, would anybody ever want this, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important to recognize that it's usually at the intersection of two unusual schools of thought.
And that's really, just to add to that as well, where you mentioned in regards to human data, I think you should definitely expand on that, because that affects all 7 billion people on Earth, and what you're doing is incredibly important. And I want you to speak more on that, on the fact that you're trying to get the UN to have to adopt it as a 31st right on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the human data. I think that's absolutely fascinating. Really break it down, why we should care about that.
So I think first of all, we should recognize that this pattern, the pattern of human beings taking ownership of something that's a byproduct of our intrinsic existence, and sharing in the value that's created from that byproduct. This is not new. We are not the first people in the world that are trying to do this. This pattern has played out twice before. This pattern of human beings getting choice, control, and compensation over a byproduct of ours. So the first pattern played out was in the 1600s in the ability for us to own our creativity. So with the Statute of Monopolies in 1623, the UK Parliament passed the first patent regulation, so to speak, that says, no, this individual's thoughts belongs to them. And if those thoughts are being used, they should have choice, control, and compensation around those thoughts. And that early beginnings of intellectual property law, which led to things like patents and trademarks and copyrights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So human beings, we then had control of our creativity, right? And think about how we flourished after that. In the 1800s, again, around our productivity, so around labor, right? Prior to the 13th Amendment in the United States, you could not get paid for your labor, or at least you shouldn't, right? And again, it's a byproduct of our existence, right? It's productivity that we can do and we can make things. And we saw labor laws passed and we got there. It's the same pattern that we're playing out again, right? Our innate human data, and I'm not just talking about your Facebook status or your Google status. I'm talking about your medical history. I'm talking about your geolocation data. I'm talking about your purchases. I'm talking about what content you watch on your television, energy consumption on your home, the service records of your car. I'm talking about those data sets, the things that would not exist unless you existed innately, right? Those things should belong to us. And if they are used to create value, we should be involved in that value stream. And so we're playing out the same pattern again. What's important here is the timing. So when Facebook started, or when the early electronic medical record system started, it was not enough for us to worry about, right? It was kind of like, okay, I give you my status and I can find my high school friends. Okay, cool, not a bad deal, right? But that deal starts to deteriorate over time into an improper fraction. That improper fraction today is the human data marketplace, which is the aggregate of the amount of money that's made from human data annually is about $250 billion a year.
Whoa, damn.
Yeah, Facebook and Google are the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole bunch of stuff under the water. So we've gotten to a point where this is an improper fraction. Healthcare data alone is $67 billion a year, right? We've gotten to a point where this is an improper fraction. And the reason why we believe that now is the time is because we're seeing the same Goldilocks conditions of change that happened in the 1600s and then in the 1800s. There were three things that were there both times. The first is the direction or the trajectory of the injustice was not sustainable for the human species, right? So if we didn't figure out a way to pay artists and writers, by the way, which is where starving artists came from, the phrase, like if we couldn't figure out a way to do that, how would books continue to be written? How would art continue to be moved forward, right? And so that was the first thing. The second is that the solution had to benefit consumers, corporations, and governments. And in intellectual property laws, they benefit consumers, corporations, and governments. Governments, because government could tax the income, right? And the third is that public opinion has to boil over, right? Public has to care about it. So in the 1600s, we saw that. In the 1800s with slavery, same thing. The trajectory was not going to sustain the species. Like, we couldn't enslave each other forever, right? The solution of labor laws benefit consumers, corporations, and governments. Corporations, because like you and I probably could not have owned slaves in the 1800s. I mean, I don't know your background, me for sure, no, right?
Yeah, Africa. I'm from Africa, East Africa.
Yeah, right. So we couldn't start companies because you needed to own slaves to start companies, right? So think about what labor laws did to thrive the species forward. And of course, public opinion was boiling over on slavery. We see the same conditions today. This improper fraction of these companies continuing to use our data to make hundreds of billions of dollars of money, and we not getting cut into the deal, is not sustainable for the human species. There's going to be a revolt eventually. Number two is we're saying that it should be your property, which means much like you have a title for your car and a title for your land, you have a title for your data, which means that you could pass it off in your estate. You could donate it for a tax write-off. If you earn income, it's taxable, right? You can negotiate in fair trade. If someone uses it without your explicit permission, it's theft, right? Those types of things will benefit consumers, corporations, and governments. Governments, because they tax income. And last but not least, public opinion is boiling over on this matter. Your head exploded when I told you the size of the human data marketplace just now, right?
Dude.
This didn't start because of Cambridge Analytica, by the way.
I couldn't believe.
Yeah, this started with Snowden. The minute all these documents became unclassified and we could start to see what's going on behind the scenes. And then, the 2016 election in the United States of America was a really good example of data being used and everybody now understanding that it was there in the first place. Cambridge Analytica is just the tip of the iceberg. Yeah. Every industry is about to have their Cambridge Analytica. The financial services industry, I don't know what it's like in the UK, but in the US, your credit report is an amalgamation of your transactions on your credit card and your bank, right? It's being collected by 3 companies. They sell it. You don't get a cut in on it. 30-something% of it has errors. You have to pay to fix it. There's a whole industry around it for you to pay to fix your credit score. And by the way, if you want your own credit score, you have to pay them for your own credit score. So Correct. Every single industry has their Cambridge Analytica moment coming. And what we're creating a vehicle for those organizations who don't want to be caught in that carnage to step out and go, you know what? I'm done with this digital slavery. I think human data should be human property. I want to be
You just nailed it. You said that. Digital slavery. That succinctly describes where we are right now. But wow, it's just, I really wanted you to touch upon that because it's happening to us. It has been happening to us every day.
But it's not our fault.
Meant
We couldn't know 5 years ago,
that
right?
it's crazy because without these scandals coming to the fore, it wasn't just Cambridge Analytica. It was even in the UK, we had issues with companies selling people's data on without the explicit consent of the people that the data belong to. But even here in the UK, we are governed by the Data Protection Act. And other legislations. There's more in the pipeline that will try and protect citizens from being spied on, or certain things being used for political, financial, or other reasons. I know in what's happening with in America. I know that with the Mueller investigation, there was deep concerns regarding how there was, Russian influence, but they were using they had all these millions of data points, and how they aggregated all of that information to create fake groups and websites to instill some sort of disharmony and chaos, and it's all this orchestrated warfare, digital warfare going on, and we're not even aware of how deep how far the scale is. It's on. I heard it's also on a global level, and so Facebook had to send all these messages when you logged in or when you got online as a reminder that you may have been affected by the Cambridge Analytica scandal or something else, and then for us to review our privacy policies and so on. And now we have to click on how many approvals to allow cookies and monitored and adwares, malwares and whatnot. But really speak on that, because what do we it seems so overwhelming as the average person. Where can we start to try and push this forward and get some of that back? Will the solution be political as well as financial? How do we go about? What do we do? What can the ordinary person do to start pushing back against the stolen data and pushing back against digital slavery?
So I think it's important to recognize that this is a movement. This is not a business, right? This type of historic socioeconomic change requires a movement. And all good movements have a slogan, right? We have a slogan for our movement, which is my data, my property. Right? You remember, like,
nice.
Not by nature, other people's property, right? This is my data, my property, right? Now, when you think about the movement is focused on the use of our data and our ability to be cut into the deal. And it's important to separate that from privacy, because privacy is you mask my personal information so that no one can figure out that I'm Richie Etwaru, and you still use my data to make money, right? Property is, hey man, whether my privacy is taken care of or not, you are using my property to make money, and I want to be cut into that deal. And so from a public perception perspective, it's important that we don't get comfortable because we get a new privacy bill. Because privacy bill is too easy to check the box. Of course, yeah, I'll remove your first name, last name, but I'll still make money from your data. Right? It's important that we move it to a place of property, right? And privacy is already dead. Like, I don't know what we're fighting for. Like, the day you pop the AOL CD into your IBM Aptiva and you dialed up on your 14.4 modem, your privacy was dead that day, right? We just didn't know, right?
Wow.
So privacy, we might resurrect it. And even if we clean up Facebook, we will still be digital slaves, because while we will have our privacy, our property will still be inappropriately used to create hundreds of billions of dollars, and we're not going to deal. So I think that's the first thing that consumers need to know. That privacy and property are two different sides of the same issue. And privacy is in the 1800s, plantation owners would come out and say, you know what? Slaves don't need to be free. All they need is better food and better mattresses. Okay? They don't need to be free. All they need is a little better quality of life. That's kind of like what privacy is. Property for data was saying, no, man, It's my data, my property. I want to be cut into the deal. If you're going to use it to make money, I want to be cut into the deal. So the first thing is consumers have to understand that, because a lot of consumers are like, well, I got GDPR, so I'm good, right? I'm like, okay, are you getting paid? No, I'm not getting paid, but I got GDPR. See the problem there, right? So that's the second is, this requires action, right? And the more of us that join the movement, the faster we get to a point where our data is classified as property. Now, we've done the work to sort of at least put the UN on alert, right? It takes a lot of bravery to come out as an organization and go, we're going to declare the 31st human right. Like it's not like it's not that easy, because you're not the UN, right? And I don't know who gave the UN the privilege to declare 30 human rights, but I certainly don't have it, and we don't, right? So it takes bravery, right? So we're alerting everyone in the stack. We're working with local countries. We're working with politicians, regulators, academia, as well as the healthcare industry in the US as we express this vision here. But I think consumers have an incredible responsibility to take action. And the action that we need is to get on the app and claim your data as your property. Because the more people that claim data as property, the more likely is that we'll get there. And I'll bring this full circle for you. The reason why we're using as one of the pieces of our solution, right? Our solution involves all sorts of technologies, but one of the pieces of the solutions of our technology is blockchain. And when we looked at the fact that the problem at hand is that we don't have a global agreement on how we should own our data and who owns it. And then we saw this technology came along called blockchain, which actually solves for one of the fundamental flaws of human species, which is we can't agree well. Right? You put 200 human beings in a room and you say, guys, I need all 200 of you to agree on your top 3 movies, okay? It could take a couple of weeks, okay? We're terrible at agreement. So what we did was we created pools of power, things like government, things like the UN, things like the church, to hold our agreements and then enforce it. And as a result, we civilized, right? Which, by the way, was a good thing. Now, we might have over-centralized those agreements a little bit. Blockchain allows us to take things that are currently held in centralized pools of power and test a hypothesis to see whether we could decentralize it. Now, currency was the first hypothesis. Currency was a global hypothesis to test. Like prior to Bitcoin, only a bank could tell you what a currency is and how it works, right? And if enough of us agree on the price of the coin, the transactional history of all the outstanding coins, and the balance of everyone's wallet, who's the government to tell us that that's not a currency? So we're using blockchain for the same agreement. If enough of us agree that our data should be property, and we lay down the evidence by claiming it and getting a title for it and setting our preferences around it, who are the corporations to tell us that it's not our property? Who are the governments to tell us it's not? And who's the UN to go, sorry, that's not a human right, right? That's what we need the public to take the action to get on the app and show that this is something that you believe should happen. And we're a powerful species when we act together. We are a powerful species when we act together.
So true. And I love your title of your book, Blockchain Trust Companies. Every company is at risk of being disrupted by a trusted version of itself. And I thought that was the coolest title, a trusted version of itself. That's the true threat, isn't it? Really speak to how you got into what excited you about blockchain? I mean, you mentioned some parts of it, but what excited you? What drove you to think that this is it? This is the technology that will bring this to life. In terms of human data, we need a globalized approach. Our solution definitely has to be on that level, on that scale. So you've mentioned some parts, but really go into the nitty gritty. Why is it that every single person on this planet has to consider how, tell us, educate us in regard to that. What is the ultimate goal for 7 billion people on Earth? Where do you see it going, and how can this work on a realistic level, on a day-to-day basis? How is this going to change our lives and improve it?
I'll approach it from two different corners. On the left side of I'll have one conversation on the left side, one conversation on the right side, right? On the left side of it, I think it's important for us to understand that data is the new strategic natural resource. Okay? And most of the wealth in the world either came from land, salt, or oil. Okay? If you had land, you were rich. If you were somehow or the other being able to sell salt, you were rich. Or if you had oil, you were rich. And that's why we see these spikes in variations of wealth in the world, right? Data, everybody has data. Okay, and everybody could participate in this new sort of wave of wealth that would be made from data. Now, the reason why it's important above and beyond the income is the following. The data from human beings are being increasingly used to automate our jobs. Right? Smarter systems. Well, how do you think robots learn how to do your job? They got to look at human data to learn how to do human jobs, right?
Okay.
So the data is increasingly being used to automate our jobs. And with the smartening of systems and the improvements in robotics, it's not going to be long before we have an unemployable class of human species. Because our academic system and the pedagogy is not training us in time to be able to really do the jobs that will be left after the manual jobs are automated, right? And so when you look at that, most people are arguing that universal basic income is the way that we will fund ourselves when we get to an unemployable class. Data is universal passive income, right? It allows us to be able to fill that gap. So that's one side of the conversation. And in there as well is an even scarier thought, which is we have always had wars over strategic natural resources. We're not a species that's built for peace. I know that's a pretty ridiculous thing to say, but like that's built for peace.
I mean, history bears out. I mean, it's been full of violence. So yeah, go ahead.
Just go through the pages, right? You'll see it, right? And you know, in a world where people like Elon Musk exist, and the dependency on fossil fuel and oil is reducing, the new strategic natural resource is data. And I see World War III being digital, being fought by hackers and by programmers. And I think we got to start thinking about how we deal with that today. That's the first reason, right? And that's sort of a social reason for it, right? The second reason why I think we have to be super present about this is that, you know, at some point when society is atomized, right? When we don't act in unison, right? And when our civic fabric is strained, which is we don't want to do things for the good of our species. In the absence of a strong counter narrative, demagoguery tends to exist unmolested. And every time in human history that we've seen these unnecessary pools of power, we have actually been screwed in the process. Yeah. And Facebook and Google and the tech companies and Silicon Valley all sucking up all this data and having this powerful asset now to be able to make predictions, to be able to automate entire communities out of work and entire classes out of work and to influence elections and all that type of stuff. We can't wait for this to become bigger than it is right now. Because how do you roll yourself back from that? How do you roll yourself back from a world where all of the data is already in somebody else's hands and they have complete control over you? Yes.
So what can we do to, will we ever catch up? Will we ever have laws and enforcement applied retrospectively, or do you think that's too late now? It's all gone. Do you think it's now about taking action now and just trying to do damage limitation? And what do you think is going to be the outcome for us, for the ordinary person?
Yeah. So I don't think we're going to be able to go back retroactively. In the US, we're seeing a tremendous amount of acceptance in the legislative ranks around this idea that human data should be human property for a multitude of reasons. The obvious of which, it means government gets to tax the income. But there are other benefits around it, around, making sure that there's a balance between consumers and corporations. That's always been a cat and mouse game, right? That governments have had to intervene. So my co-founder and I have been advising legislators all across the country and across some parts of the world on putting new regulations in place. We're very optimistic about it, not because of the regulatory framework, but because of two other reasons. One is there's no shortage of corporations who are standing up going, you know what? I don't want to wait to be caught in this. I want to be ahead of this, right? And the second is we're seeing academia pick up concepts like data ethics and put it in the curriculum, and fair trade data like fair trade coffee and putting it in the curriculum. Now, for those corporations that are ready to operate above board, the reason why they're ready is because the competitive landscape of the future is trust and transparency. And let me unpack that for you a little bit. Commerce usually has a couple of things where companies differentiate with over a period of time. So when my parents grew up, the differentiator for a company was price and quality, right? Is it good and can I get it for a good price, right? In our time, the differentiators are experience and engagement, right? Every company wants you to feel great about what you bought, regardless of whether you just bought a chapstick or not, right? It doesn't matter. It's experience and engagement. And over time, these cycles, they start and then they end. So the price and quality differentiating cycle has ended. We're in the experience and engagement differentiating cycle. Not that price and quality is not important, but like experience and engagement is a little bit more important than that now, right? We see a shift happening where the next differentiator is going to be trust and transparency, where consumers are going to want to know, where did you make that product? What type of labor was used for that product? What type of profits are you making? What's the safety of that product? What's the impact of that product on the environment? Those are the types of questions that consumers are going to want answered in the next generation of commerce. And I package all of that into being a trusted company and a transparent company. And I believe, and we believe, that at the core of the trust economy is going to be a corporation's posture on how you treat human data. We think that will be one of the core differentiators. Imagine a world where companies will have a rating system or some sort of badge of honor that says, we don't use human data from the black market. We only use fair trade human data. Much like coffee shops today have a badge of honor that says, we don't use coffee that wasn't paid for properly. We use fair trade coffee, right? So that's sort of why we believe that this will continue to play out that way.
And I guess the blockchain space, the technology will verify, it will be traceable, and it will be immutable. So people can always see that they are verified and it's authentic, it's genuine.
Yes, we need an immutable record of statements that are made. It's not like companies are not held to a standard today. Every industry has some sort of compliance standards. But if you've ever worked for an auditor or you've ever been in a compliance department of an organization, you know that the compliance reports that are given to the regulators are the most flattering set of lies that can be given to the regulators, right? It's not, and consumers don't have an opportunity to opine, inspect, and debate that, right? This type of transparency where you can have information that is immutable with the protected parts held back, but parts for the public to see at scale is going to usher in this world of a trusted and a transparent economic sector. Blockchain is interesting for a multitude of reasons, but one of the things that I think is very interesting about blockchain is that it's simpler and cheaper to build systems that has immutability built in, right? Like anything that you could do with blockchain, you could do with a non-blockchain technology, but it'll be 10 times more expensive and 20 times more complex and probably takes 3 times more time and people to do it, right? But having things like immutability built in and having things like public-private key relationships that can operate at scale, so you can only see what you should see, to be able to sort of broadcast trust, that's what's encouraging. And I think that's going to be the trigger of the trusted economic period. And at the heart of why you would trust a company or how do you evaluate how trusted a company is going to be their posture on human data.
And, just to add to that as well, you mentioned in a point in your written piece as well that it will be a way for the developing nations to play catch up and to bring more equity, more. We're able to get more control over what's happening and so on. We would have we would be leapfrog in terms of development wise. We would be able to leapfrog decades, if not centuries, worth of disparity. So really speak to that, because I thought that was quite important, and that affects us all ultimately.
Well, so with every new invention, whether it was electricity or the steam engine or the internet or now blockchain, what it does is that it lowers the barrier to entry. And by lowering the barrier to entry, I mean that it reduces the amount of startup capital, so to speak, that you have to get into the business, right? And with blockchain, it actually lowers the technological hurdle significantly, because all of this stuff being built into the fabric, right? Now just downloading the chain code allows you to build businesses where more of the platform is baked in, right? If you think back to technology, like before cloud and some of the GitHub-like inventions, right? And some of the API economy, when you wanted to start a tech company, you had to find servers, you had to find, an operating system, you had to write everything from the ground up, like a login screen. You would write the login screen yourself and manage passwords yourself. And then over time, new platforms were built where like you don't have to do that. You just got to pull the pieces together and make a web page, right? You got to pull together and make an app, right? You got to pull this supplier, that supplier, and you have a marketplace, right? Blockchain takes that even one step further, which is you don't have to worry about immutability and integration anymore, right? And every time we lower the barrier to entry, we invite the disenfranchised citizens of the world to participate in commerce. So someone in a third world country 20 years ago couldn't start a company that had all of this built in already, because it required capital, it required connections, it required know-how, right? But having that baked into the platform opens it up for people to start businesses, people who traditionally would not have had the resources, the relationships, or the know-how.
And people are concerned, however, though, we've all good. We hear great things about the blockchain space, and all of these developments happening, different stakeholders getting involved and whatnot. But what's your real do you have some real serious concerns about the technology? Is it more to do with where we are, how young the space is, or is there real fundamental issues which you feel will cause us, real problems later on? Is this all that it's cracked up? We want to know what's the catch. What is it about blockchain that you fear, if we don't take advantage of it now, where you think perhaps major players or even governments will try and find what, like, because you did speak on digital slavery, so I thought that's really important. What are one of the concerns? What should we be looking out as well?
So I think, look, there's a lot of people who are arguing that blockchain doesn't scale, and what that sentence should be is that they're missing two words: as yet. Blockchain doesn't scale as yet, right? The internet didn't scale. Like when I downloaded my first picture on my flip phone, it took like 5 minutes, right? But it had to scale over time. And there's always inventors and inventions that will scale that over time, right? So I'm not worried about the scaling. What I'm worried about is what I like to call a longitudinal moral compass, right? So the internet, was invented and then it was scaled over time, but it wasn't always used for good, okay? And while the internet moved faster than things like steam engines and combustion engines, it still took like 20 years before we realized that it was used for bad. But paradigms, they come to fruition faster and faster and faster. So I don't think we have 20 years with blockchain to figure out how we ensure that it's used for good only and not for bad as well. I think we probably have about 10, right? So it's important for us to think about not just the tool, but how is the tool being used for, right? Can we build a longitudinal moral compass to look forward and make sure that the choices that we're making are actually going to serve the benefit of our species over time? That's what worries me the most. And that will continue to be a worry. Whatever comes after blockchain, it's going to raise the bar again. It's going to move even faster, right? And whatever comes after that is going to raise the bar, move even faster. So increasingly, when we deploy businesses or we deploy capabilities, it is important that we think about what is the long-term socioeconomic implications of it? What's the long-term moral outcome that we're looking for here? And cigarettes is just a great example. Okay, at one point, cigarettes were a great thing, right?
Yeah, the tobacco industry, wow. They really had us fooled.
And at one point, Facebook was a great thing, right? And here we are. So I think it's important that people who are entering the blockchain space recognize that you have a responsibility to make sure that you're building moral products, that you're building products that are going to create a brighter future for us. And I know that sounds really soft and fluffy, but man, if Facebook's not an example of that, then what is, right? Like if I can't convince you that there's a amount of time that needs to be spent at the inception of an idea to make sure that that idea does not start to stink in 20 years or in 10 years, then you probably want to readjust your moral compass a little bit.
And speaking of moral compass, I thought that reminded me actually that you said you sometimes go back to your neighborhood just to keep in touch and with your old friends and old faces, and seeing that some people, have you ever, like, I don't know whether it was Jay-Z or another Nas, I can't remember whose autobiography I was reading. I know Jay-Z had Decoded, and I was reading some of those lines there, but certain people like doing the same thing, hardly any evolution, any change. It's not even the physical or the financial slavery, but it's more of the mental. What do you feel? What can we do regardless of because we have ghettos, slums, projects. I was brought up in the projects with my two sisters, and my mom had to raise us for 8 years before dad joined us. So what is it that we can do, we can say to not only inspire them to think bigger and to step out beyond their hood, beyond their city, and to really open up the world to them through technology, through the space? Because I guess one of the arguments that people say is that, you know, everyone has to be responsible for themselves, but sometimes you need that little help. We didn't get here without mentors or people supporting us, or that friendly, that person, that colleague who, like you said, you're one of the hidden Steve Jobs. What can we communicate to our people that we used to see meet before, and when we go back, how can we be the bridge to gap that thing? Because if they don't know or they're not aware, it's as if they don't exist, right? So what can we do there?
So I'll give you two answers. One's personal and one's from experience. Personal answer is I've got a 1-year-old son, and we have a second kid on the way. So I'll be having
Congrats.
And thank you. And I've been thinking about what to write in their game room, right? So I'm a big lettering. I like to put letterings on the wall. And I wrote down a phrase. I don't know if I can remember it exactly, but it was like, the only difference between one human being and another is bravery.
Ooh.
Right.
Ooh, bravery.
I think bravery is understated.
It's timeless. It speaks through the ages.
Yeah. And the second is vocabulary. So, you know, sometimes I still go to the old barbershop, the same one I used to go to in South Jamaica, Queens. Okay. And what I noticed is that the vocabulary in the barbershop or on the streets or in the pizza store or in the Chinese restaurant, it doesn't open up a narrative to help you break out. For example, things like incorporating a company is not discussed, right? In sort of these colloquial areas, right? Things like stocks and shares and options, right? And markets or patents or raising capital or writing a business plan, like those things, those words are not in the narrative. of these communities. And I think it's not that people don't know them, it's just not in the narrative. And I think culture starts with music, culture starts with clothing, and then culture starts with narrative, right? And the narrative is just not there. It's just not perpetuated, right? If I go back to my old sort of neighborhoods and I hang out, I guarantee you I will not hear the word patent. It just won't come up.
I can attest to that as well. I haven't heard that in a while.
Right. So to me, it's about getting the vocabulary there. Like, and it's not something hard because we're innately curious. Like if you say to somebody a patent, someone who's ambitious or brave is going to go, hey man, what's a patent? And then I'll go, oh, it's this thing that you can file. And if you have an idea, you can protect that idea so no one else can steal it. And as a result, you can build a business around it because it gives you enough time to build a business and make money. You'd be like, never knew that existed, right? So I think the vocabulary is really, really, really important. And the vocabulary is just not there. And it starts in the barbershop, right? It starts in the coffee shop. It starts in the Chinese restaurant. It starts on the basketball court, right? It starts in the nightclubs. It starts in the bars. The vocabulary is just not there. And I would go to other communities where it's the same thing. It's teenagers, right? Or it's young people that are having fun, but you'd be surprised. They're talking about stocks. They're talking about companies. They're talking about economic trends. They're talking about sanctions. They're talking about political implications of the International Monetary Bank, right? Like that type of stuff. So I think the vocabulary has to get sorted out.
Well said. I know we've taken up quite a considerable amount of your time, and you definitely have been dropping some bars, and it's really inspirational in regards to how you're trying to speak to 7 billion people. You know, the one thing that we do have in common is our humanity. So, and our data, the fact that we're all 7 billion people on Earth, and not one person shares exact same DNA, unique fingerprints, and our data will definitely, really what makes us special. It sounds so corny and cliche, but it really is our differences. It really is our uniqueness. So the fact that you're working on a major problem that will bring so much value and blessing to not just in our here and now, but future generations, and building a more equitable, you know, a more just and fair society by everyone participating in their rescue and participating in their legacy building is so key. So we thank you so much for bringing that insight to us. And I'm sure everyone watching this will share that sentiment. But any final, before I say any final words, where can we reach you? Where can we follow you? And where can we communicate with you?
On Twitter, I'm at Richie Etwaru. That's one word, RICHIE-ETWARU. And our app is called the My31 app. So if you go to the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store and you search for hashtag My31, meaning My 31st Human Right, so hashtag MY31, you'll find the app, download the app, claim your data as your property, get a title for your property, set your preferences on it, so your preferences can start to get populated into the marketplace, so that when corporations are using your data and they see your preferences, and if you want to get paid, at least the opportunity is there.
Amen to that. That's certainly what I'm going to do as soon as I finish today. So thank you so much, Richie. God bless you, and good luck. Also, many happy blessings with your. You said you had one on the way, so congratulations, and praying for fantastic delivery and everything. You know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying, mate. Happy holidays.
And any final words before you go?
Yeah, I think, you know, this is something that I wrote about in the piece as well. A lot of us look at the world and assume that it's just the way it is. And we have to remember that everything that we see around us, and this is an inspiration that I got from Steve Jobs himself, everything that we see around us was made by another member of the same species that we're from. Everything. This glass, the light behind me, this laptop, this typewriter on my side. I actually have an old school typewriter. All of it was made by another human being that has a pretty similar capability that we have. So it's important to understand that you're born with it.
Mm. You're born with it. And you said something else before, my data. Say that again, because I really have to write that down and remember it until.
My data, my property.
My data, my property. We got to get, oh my God, we're going to have to start movements everywhere, marches everywhere. My data, my property, better pay. Pay.
Actually, you know what? There was one audience that I was in, and there was a very, a little bit of an older lady, right? And she came over to me afterwards, and she said, I get what you're doing. And I'm like, okay, ma'am, I'm glad. And she says, I get what you're doing. What you're saying is, cut me in, bitches. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. And I was like, you know, that's a really good tagline. I'm not sure it's going to appeal to all demographics, but that's solid. That's solid.
Yep. To certain audiences, I think that will be the realest thing that will, like, if they can take anything away, it'll be, you better cut me in and be
right. Or it's the data hustle, right? It's the data hustle.
Yeah.
Whichever one it is.
For sure. Thank you. Right. Thank you so much, Richie. This was your last one as well. So, hey, well done. You made it. And happy holidays. And thank you very much, Richie.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.